Welcome everyone. So I've lit this little candle because this is what I would have done in a real in-person room. So thank you so much for tuning in and spending some of your Sunday night, morning, afternoon with me. I did the sharing yesterday in Stroud in the Trinity rooms, and it was very sweet to have some of my community people here, and my mum and sister were also visiting, so that felt really special to share that with them. Tried to like pace myself out, not speak too quick in English, but yeah, they managed to like understand most things, which is great. And the way I've thought about this share is in two parts. The first one is around the COP16, the Biodiversity COP, and then the second part is about my time in the Caribbean, which this beautiful picture is from. And have some slides to share because I'm a nerd, so that's what nerds do. And you're absolutely welcome to raise your hand and ask question, or if I don't see your hand raised because I'm hyper focused on what I'm sharing, just unmute and interrupt and ask things. But we're a really small group, so I'm happy for disruption to happen. I don't really know how long this is going to be. Yesterday, the event lasted over like an hour and a half, 2 hours. I hope that won't be as much online because that's a lot of Zoom time. But we will see how we go, basically. And there'll be a little break in between the first and the second chapter. Yeah, thanks, Camilla. All good. Leave when you have to leave, and you can say goodbye. It's a bit nicer, but it's also okay. Great. All right. Screen showing up all right? I hope so. I see some heads nodding. Great. So, oh, hold on. Little interruption. I guess my first question is when you think about Colombia, what comes to mind? And you can unmute or type in the chat, whatever works better for you.
Coffee and guns.
Yep.
I actually have lots of
Oh.
other words. It's a lovely place. That was my short summary.
So much comes to mind. There's really ancient cultures there, high away in the Andes or high away in the mountains. Really interesting groups of people, a lot of attack from the outside world. Yeah, really beautiful and diverse.
Is the film Alina? The film Alina is in Colombia. Is that right?
I don't know. Possibly. Don't know about this
I
movie.
forget the name of the people that live, but I think they're also high in the mountains. And there's a movie that's about their way of life, but they don't use money at all. And I think they stick in my mind because they're somewhere in Colombia.
Great. There's also a lot of dancing. Lots of
Yes, absolutely. Just a little technical question. Can you actually see the whole slide, including all of the map on your screen? You can.
Yeah.
Great. Wonderful. So I've only put a few selections here, but that's some of the things I really liked about Colombia when I went there were the food, because I'm a foodie, so that's what happens. These are little arepa, little breads, fried breads. Obviously, lots of exotic fruit like guanabana. This is agua de panela that I made yesterday in Stroud. It's basically like a big sugar block that you heat up and have with a bit of lime. And aguardiente, which is a strong liquor, I think made of sugarcane, which is very popular. And yeah, as some of you shared, oh, here we go. So as most international travelers, you land in Bogota. And I was really lucky because I was hosted by a really dear friend of a good friend of mine that you'll see later in the slides. And so all of the little colorful casitas, houses, actually are part of Ciudad de Bolivar, which is the poorest part of the city. And further on the left, you can see the really high-rise tall buildings. And so a lot of these colorful houses, you're talking about no running water, no electricity, that kind of situation. And then on the other end of town is obviously a very different life. So I didn't spend a lot of time there, but we went on a hike, and I thought that this this image, the painting in on the hike was really powerful because that's really how I experienced a lot of the country about. Of course, there is still a big legacy of the violence and like trafficking and violence against women and the land and just so many layers of it. And at the same time, I could really see how people like socially and culturally and politically now with the current government that is running, they're really trying to like move away from it. And so it was really interesting to see how intricate the networks of violence are in the country or in the societal fabric and how people were trying to like shift away from that somehow. So that's why this quote is like that I thought was quite powerful. We are not a country of war, but we are a warrior people. And these sculptures were in Medellin, which is the slide just before. Yes. So Medellin is a really amazing place. One of the things I know about it is that they've managed to reduce the temperature of the streets by 2 degrees by planting lots of trees. Incredibly modern. I actually don't know enough because I only spent a weekend there, but they have the cleanest subway I've maybe ever seen in the world. Okay, outside of Copenhagen, but definitely cleaner than Paris. And just super innovative, lots of like tech and sustainable businesses. So yeah, really inspiring to actually step into a third world country and be in such a modern city. And this is what I was showing you just before. So these are sculptures by a local sculptor called Fernando Botero. I think he's like passed away quite a long time. And so the left one was the original one. And as you can see, it completely exploded because a bomb was set underneath. And so on the stone are the names of all the victims that died from that terrorist attack. And so instead of getting rid of the whole thing and building a new one, he said, I want to keep the original. And so the picture on the right is right next to that one. So he made exactly the same sculpture with the same mold to like keep the legacy of the attack and what had been happening. And Medellin is like the town of Pablo Escobar and was super known for like the cartels and everything. And again, they've gone through this like incredible socio-political restructuring of bringing safety and peace and economic stability to the city. So I thought that was such a powerful visual example of the transition and yeah, how people are trying to move on, but still not forgetting the past, right? And so this is my friend Jorge on the left. We met in Copenhagen. We studied together in the master degree. And there was something so special about being there at the same time. I ended up staying with his mum in Medellin, who was making just the best breakfast and being super cute little granny. And obviously we indulged in some really nice coffee. Medellin is in the Cafetero region. I didn't get to see much, but it's like mega famous for its coffee. So yeah, that's something that feels really dear to my heart is when I get to spend time with some of my homies in their home country or whatever region they're feel really close to. And yeah, that felt really special. And obviously, Colombia is also known for its super rich biodiversity. So I think it's like, I don't really like the ranking because it depends on the data, etc., but definitely top 5 biodiversity hotspot and known for its like #1 in terms of bird species. And so it was just a feast for the eyes. Like these are some of the pictures from the zoological garden in Medellin, and it's just so great. There's all these colors and the grains, and it felt really alive and vibrant. But I did not go out there to just make funny faces in the supermarket or mesmerize at these incredible flowers with like, how can you be so beautiful and so prickly at the same time? It completely blew my mind. Or eat delicious arepa de choclo, which was my favorite food, I think, especially homemade like this in the market. So good. I went with a very specific purpose in mind, made my way to Cali, which is maybe the another really big town in the country. And that's in the Afro-Pacifico region, so where you have a lot of descendants of black slaves, the capital of salsa, very loud, very alive culture and city. And the reason why I went there was to attend the COP16. COP, if you don't know about that, it stands for Conference of the Parties. So you have several of them. The most famous one is the Climate COP, which full acronym is UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. The one I went to is called the CBD, which is not what most people know its acronym for. It stands for the Convention on Biological Diversity, a lot more geeky. And the third COP that is even less known is the UNCDD, the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. And this one and the desertification happen every 2 years. The climate COP happens every year. And so what happens? So all of what I'm going to share with you is about the blue zone. The blue zone is the space where you need, I'm looking for my badge, but it's now in one of the bags from yesterday, so I'm not going to dig for it now. You need an accreditation for the blue zone. And this is where the negotiations happen. And the green zone is for civil society, open access, normally a lot easier to get into. So in the blue zone, you have these kind of things, which are rooms for the plenary sessions. This one is currently empty because the one where you can see the people on the screen speaking was so full that they shipped people onto that one. But usually you would have delegates sitting in front of their country badges there. So you have high-level segments. This is when the presidency or the COP secretariat announces the progress and does the welcoming and the closing and all of these kind of stuff, the big moments of the COP. You have a lot of press conferences and panels. Currently on the picture are some of the key people of the IIFB, the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity. So I attended most of their press conferences, which happened beginning, midpoint, and endpoint, sharing their priorities and demands as Indigenous peoples in the negotiations and, yeah, some of the debates. More people speaking with screens, which is most of what's happening at COP in the Blue Zone. Lots of side events. You have all of these like big plenary rooms, you have smaller ones, and then you have all sorts of pavilions and little corners, and it's just kind of non-stop people talking, basically. And every now and then in the blue zone, you also have protests. Protests tend to happen more in the green zone because there is less pressure in terms of regulations and the things that you can and can't do. I think there is something around noise level that you can actually bring any amplifiers or anything like this in the blue zone. But this protest specifically happened towards the end of the second week. So the COPs spread over 2 weeks. And this was due to Indigenous people were facing one of the exit of the plenary, pressuring negotiators to finalize a deal on the subsidiary body of the Article 8J, which I will share a little bit more at the end because it actually passed through. So that was one of the really big historic win for Indigenous peoples at this COP. And that was a silent protest. So people could kind of come in and have a sign, but it was very restricted and half an hour, that's it. You can't have more or less. So that tends to happen towards the end of the COP to really push for the negotiations to come to a close. All right, so how did I make my way there? Well, the first affiliation that I managed to collaborate with are the CBD Women's Caucus, which is an amazing group of, it's a platform for all women and girls who work in biodiversity and conservation to advocate for their rights and for gender justice, to be recognized within policies and regulations and decision-making processes. And so my rhythm there was to go in the blue zone from 8 till 8. And usually you have in the mornings, you have different meetings in the caucuses. So you can see the picture on the right there, Marie Khan's Women's Caucus was the pavilion that we had for us. And then you have one for Europe, one for Indigenous peoples, businesses, NGOs, like you have all of these different ones, and they usually happen at the same time. So that's a way for, let's say, affiliate groups to brief themselves, focus on what's happening today, what are our priorities, and then spread and try to push for whatever their agenda is. And so the main project I had with the Women's Caucus was to realize a podcast. It's very tricky, I realized, to do a podcast in an area where most people are speaking and there is very little isolated area. So I would often take people outside by the grass, which was also quite nice for them to have a bit of a break. And thankfully, it wasn't raining because it was Colombia, so that was great. Would have not been the same case in England. So these are the current episodes that are on the podcast, which is available on Spotify. As you can see, the last one I released like literally last week, so I'm still working my way through them. And these are all wonderful women working on really important things. So a lot of these series are a lot about the intersections between gender, nature, climate, human rights, this kind of trying to really take a cross-sectional understanding of why does gender matter in relation to biodiversity conservation. So yeah, and they're usually maximum 10 minutes or so. So you're really welcome to head over. The channel is called CBD Women's Caucus, and I can also share the link. And the big flagship event that we had was this called the Women Forum, which actually was over 2 days. But that was day one because that was a really big day. So on the picture at the bottom, you can see in white Susana Muhammad, which was the COP president, Minister of Environment of Colombia. To her right, the woman in blue is Francia Marquez, who is, sorry, the like second in command in Colombia. And Francia has an incredible history. One of the first Black women to be in a cabinet minister. I really invite you to like look her up, but it's just absolutely incredible that a woman of her racial, socioeconomic background ends up in a position of power like that. That was a really big thing for the country, really. And then to the right of Susanna, the woman in purple, is Tamara Ospina, who is the Vice Minister of Women. And so the picture that you see of me up there, I was on the left of that table, and that was taken by the UN photographer. Uh, bec- uh, because I'm part of the communications team of the Women's Caucus, I spent most of the day doing Instagram reels and Instagram stories and trying to like catch important moments of the whole thing. So I felt very focused and extremely drained at the end of the day. And then yesterday I had a friend asking me who works as she's like a radical feminist, and she was asking me some of the key takeaways from the session and some of the things that felt really important to Colombian like women. And I was just like, I was telling her, sometimes when you're filming or like mediating an event, you're not actually taking in the content. So I almost feel like I could look at the recordings again, and also because the event was a lot in Spanish and English. Anyway, it was really intense, but it felt like such an honor to be alongside absolute powerhouses. There were lots of women from all across Colombia, different parts of Latin America, and different parts of the world. And I don't know, I just felt really proud to be part of that network. And that day ended in a really powerful way for me because I actually had a one-on-one chat with Tamara, the Vice Minister of Women, and as part of this podcast interview for the caucus. And so usually I would do them 10, 15 minutes max because I was recording, getting back home, listening, editing, and trying to publish the next morning or that night, and then further open public release the next day. So I was trying to keep my interviews fairly short. And at the end of that conversation with Tamara, I could so feel her activist heart. So I stopped the recorder and we had this really, really moving, well, at least it moved me very much, like conversation around um, you know, the kind of people that were sitting in government with her. So something that really stuck with me was how, as part of the new Minister of Equality that's been set up this year with Gustavo Petro's government, they have a new vice ministers. Her role, Minister of Women, of Youth, LGBTQ, marginalized peoples and territories, and another one that I always forget. And she was telling me that the person running the Minister of Youth, for example, only has one eye because he was part of the youth protests on the front line. And what the military repression was doing back then was literally taking the eyes out of the protesters. And you're just like, what the fuck, man? Like some of the stories she shared with me, also some of Francia's stories, and I was like, it's I don't know, as a fellow activist and as just fellow human, it was just so incredible to have like a real heart-to-heart conversation with someone. And she was really explaining to me, like, you know, no, like we haven't had a left government for 400 years or something like that. It's always been right wing, it's always been conservative, but now we have our foot in the door, and that opens the imagination and opens a possibility for Colombian people to never forget that we can have a left-wing government again. Now the issue, and I found that about that much later in my trip, with this government, lots of good intentions, trying to bring a lot of things, great, super chaotic. Actually, lots of people who have no or very little experience about the bureaucratic side of governing. They also decided to get rid of all of the ancient ones, which then became quite hard in terms of like actually understanding how policy work is done and regulations, etc. So it was a very mixed conversation that I had with friends around some of the hopes that they had with this new government and then what they ended up doing. And obviously there is the whole mechanisms of corruption and, you know, all of that. It's still alive. So yeah, it was, but it still felt super insightful for me to talk with Tamara, and obviously a really passionate woman, and to hear about the people that are in her cabinet and be like, wow, this kind of stuff is possible. Like you can have incredible people running a country in against all odds, really. So yeah, that really stayed with me from that time. The other affiliation I traveled to COP with was this youth Colombian organization called Life of Pachamama. I was actually the only Global North member in there. It was quite a funny thing. Just before the COP started, they had a global youth like encounter by global youth for global youth. And there was this whole thing about like a map of the world and sharing where you're from. And it was just like, yeah, so I'm from Europe. I was like the only one just not from Asia or the Americas or like something like this, or Africa, which was quite, I don't know, I felt it again, it felt like a real privilege to be in that space and hearing some of the stories. The picture you see on the top with the women doing all of these hand signs is the delegation from Indonesia that I welcomed on the first night. And it was so sweet because I was actually able to speak a little bit of Indonesian with them and welcome them. That was my very first trip I did like over 12 years ago. Some very sweet people. And the thing I did not know before this collaboration with Life of Pachamama is that we were staying in hotel rooms that were not individual rooms. And so I ended up staying with three other very young, almost teenager girls that had a complete different understanding of silence and rest. And they just loved waking up at like 6:30 a.m. to iron their bloody clothes every day. And they had this thing about like putting the music on their phones with no headphones, like two of them at the same time, one in the bathroom, one in the very hard, very hard. It's very hard. So anyway, the second week I was just sleeping in other places, guys. I couldn't function. I was doing really full days and I needed my at least 6 hours of sleep without interruption. And so that's a note to self. Sort out your own accommodation for next time. Or at least make sure to have a room by yourself. Yeah, but it was very sweet to be part of that group and learn from Colombian youth from all around the country. And apart from this youth delegation from Indonesia, all of the other ones were from Colombia. So it felt like a sped up way for me to learn about all the regions and some of the issues that the youth were really working with across the country. All right, but
Just to say, I'm gonna put my camera off, but move to my headphones so I can keep hearing you for a bit longer.
sweet.
Super interesting, and thank you for sharing so much. And I will just drop off the call quietly, probably at 10 to 7 when I have to. But thank you so much, and I'll be video off, but here.
Ah, sweet. You're welcome. And I'm using this interruption to say hello to Chloe and Peg and Martin who've joined online. Hello, so nice to have you here. So the main project I actually was bringing to COP, which I was really excited about, is a podcast series in collaboration with Forest Peoples program. That was the very first time that I managed to get private funding for a trip and for a project. And so that was the reason behind this funding. And yeah, I mean, I had like no idea who I was going to talk to. I had, I didn't have a list or anything. I had someone, the comms director of
I
the,
can just send her a message.
Yeah, sure.
oh, hold on, I'm going to
Or
mute
you.
lovely people. Here we go. Admin rights, hell yeah, we love it. Um, so yeah, I guess I had no idea of like who I was going to interview on the podcast, and it all felt very fluid and emergent. But I had some like two of the highlights I really want to share here are the black woman, Lucy Mulenke from Kenya, on the bottom row, who is one of the co-founder of the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity. Incredible powerhouse. She's been in the COP sector for decades, has done like super cool grassroots and like everything from like the super local to the hyper global levels, and just learning from I don't know, an African goddess, really, African queen, and having this little moment of connection felt really special. And then the other one on the complete right-hand corner, the women with a quite fancy clothes, is Michael Sivendra, the Minister of Environment and Climate of Fiji, the title, something like that. And I actually heard him speak at an event, at a side event, and I was so blown away by the way he talked and he shared his point across that I really wanted to speak to him. So as he left the pavilion, I left and tried to follow him and couldn't find him anymore. And then saw him the next day, just kind of hanging about and in the coral pavilion, I remember. And so I remember like just making my way a bit close and like waiting for a moment so that we could have a catch his eye or whatever, catch his attention, and then sharing about my podcasts. And I had this great little thing that I would do. I'm jumping ahead a bit with my thing, but I printed these little cards, so that was a really great way to grab people's attention as well. Anyway, and he said because, very busy man, minister, so only had 5 minutes. Fine, I'm only doing 5 minutes for my podcast. Great. So we went outside the pavilion, which is where this picture was taken. And he was very sweet. He liked the questions so much that I asked him that he actually said to his assistant to like keep in touch. So I got the contact of his assistant and that evening edited, made the graphic to promote it, asked if I could use the logo of the Fiji government to the assistant who said yes, but he said like, yeah, could you change the picture? Anyway, we did some updates. And so when I shared the post, it looked like it had been an official collaboration with the government of Fiji, which obviously really amplified the reach. So I think I had over 50 shares on LinkedIn or something like this, and lots of people listening to the clip. So that felt really nice to have this like complete spontaneous collaboration that turned into something that was really, really heard somehow. And then all the other people, they come from different parts of the world. Sami, like Canada, the US, the Sahel region, Thailand, Colombia. So I was just kind of like obviously some people that I knew from either previous events or that I knew from online, and I was really keen to speak to them. And others that was just hearing and vibing with, and then asking for a little bit of that time at the end of the side event or the panel. But yeah, it felt like a really rich experience to meet all of them and have some of their time in a very dense space like COP. And so you can hear all of these, most of these, there are still some to be edited, on YouTube. And as I was showing you, I made some little propaganda cards from a local printer in Colombia. And uh, below is the picture of a UK delegate that I saw. And it's the great thing at COP is that you have these badges where you can see the affiliation of everyone because of their colors. So you can know if they are party or press or NGO or business or finance, etc. So my main strategy to get people to listen to the content that I was creating, because the purpose with this series was to amplify the demands and the priorities of Indigenous peoples, youth and women from inside the blue zone. And so I was usually targeting white men and people with like the business and finance badge. And then when I felt really drained and tired, I was targeting like other young people and women whom I knew would like more likely take the card and be interested in it. And my number one strategy was going in the queue where people were waiting for food and just I had to do a little bit of a speech. And so by the like definitely by the end of the second week, I was ready. I had like my boom 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 30 seconds sell pitch. But also, yeah, it was good to kind of adapt it a bit. And I remember one day specifically when I was doing that, and I must have been, I don't know, yeah, quite tired and then just strained and just being, I don't know, overstretched. And I gave it to a guy and also feeling like it wasn't quite getting enough attention and that kind of stuff. And I gave it to someone and he was like, thank you so much. Like the work that you're doing is so important and really like I felt so seen. I just like burst into tears and it completely like I was just like, ah, thank you so much. It's so hard. So yeah, that was there were like some really sweet moments, but otherwise it felt like fighting against the currents most of the time. So yeah, grateful for the experience and I would do it all over again. And also it would be great to work with a team and have other people who can share it and because doing everything from like the recording, the editing, creating the graphics, publishing the video on YouTube, creating the social like the social media templates, distributing is quite a lot. And yeah, we're reaching towards the end of part one, which is great. The best part of COPs for me is seeing friends. I love my friends. And yeah, some of them were new friends, like the black woman in the middle. She's a colleague of mine with the caucus, but we had never met in person from Ronda, Scovia. The person on the second row with the checkered shirt is called Ben Mirin, who is someone that I've been following on Instagram for some time, an amazing sound recordist for birds and beatboxer. And he's actually created these beats out of bird calls and played them at the UN. So we have a lot in common in our passion for eco-acoustic and that kind of stuff. So I really wanted to connect with him someday. And I had been sending him some random messages on Instagram that he like kind of ignored. And then I saw him at an event in somewhere on the nighttime in Cali. And I was like, absolute nerd. I was like, oh, hello. I think you're Ben Nearin, right? Like, you don't know me, but I'm pretty sure, like, la 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 la. Anyway, and then we became friends because we hanged out and so that was great. And then the people on the top left corner is Paul Pollisland, who's quite a local legend in England, advocate of the rights of nature and defender of the river roading. And other friends that I knew from previous COPs, like Jose, bottom left corner, a translator, and someone from Ecuador that I wearing the shell that I had met in COP26 in Glasgow in 2021. And I guess I want to highlight here that like some of these people, especially when they come from Latin America, Like you never really know if you're going to see them again. Colombia is the #1 country for environmental defenders being murdered, and it's the case for a lot of frontline defenders in, I think, I really want to say across the Americas, but in maybe in Latin countries it's a bit stronger. And yeah, it's always a privilege to spend time with them and be in their company. And then the women on the right, second row, is Frances, who was the comms director of Forest Peoples program. So it's also thanks to her that I was able to do this podcast series. Yeah. So I don't know how much of you know about this, but this COP was pretty historic in some regards. The main reasons for that, or the main reason why it was celebrated as a victory, was because there were some major wins for Indigenous peoples. So there is this thing called permanent subsidiary body, which is basically a dedicated time and space for people, some entity, to be in equal partnership with state parties and governments. At the moment, if I'm not mistaken, for the CBD, there was only a permanent subsidiary body on technical and scientific knowledge. So for scientists and experts to share their knowledge with governments, to inform them about biodiversity and conservation. What happened at this COP is that Indigenous peoples managed to get a permanent subsidiary body. So that's like a forever time and place where they can be on one-to-one footing, equal footing with governments to protect their traditional knowledge system, their practices and innovations, and really include them, the Indigenous peoples, in the decision making and dialogue with governments. So that was massively celebrated. And then in relation to that, Article 8J, which is the same like this the COP negotiation, basically you work with like all these different texts and paragraphs and documents and that kind of stuff. And so as part of that, there is something called the Article 8J. And that one, that the new program was agreed and established to ensure that the contributions of Indigenous people is recognized within the Convention on Biological Diversity and the Global Biodiversity Framework, which is the historic agreement that was signed 2 years ago in Montreal at COP15. And the GBF, the Global Biodiversity Framework, is known as the nature version of the Paris Agreement, basically. So big wins for Indigenous peoples. And then the other thing that happened is that Afro-descendants were actually included in the text and their connection to land. So that was also just not there before, just recognition of the way that African descent, like people of African descent, take care of the land and how they relate to biodiversity was just not present. And obviously that always helps with like full and effective participation and providing financial support. So all of these kind of decisions are like a push towards the right direction. It doesn't mean that things are set in motion and money moves right away in there, but it's like it helps for that to happen. And speaking of money, if you look up the whatever COP16 win, you probably will come across that one, the Cali Fund, in the top of the list. So I'm going to just read what's written on the slide there. So this new fund is designed to return some of the proceeds that companies make for the use of genetic information drawn from biodiversity in their research and development. So we're talking pharmaceutical, biotechnology, cosmetics, animal and plant breeding, for example. So that means that with this, the benefits, will go to a fund to restore and protect nature, and half of that will be distributed to Indigenous peoples and local communities. So from now on, companies that make a profit from using the DNA of plants or species, whatever, in their products and services, some of those benefits is going to a fund for conservation and biodiversity, and half of that fund is going to Indigenous peoples and local communities taking care of those lands. So another mechanism to basically try to redirect some of the money that is generated from the business world towards custodians and stewards of the land and actual nature restoration efforts. And then the other thing I wanted to highlight Obviously, there were lots more that was signed and that happened, but that felt really relevant because of how. So that's the Biodiversity and Health Global Action Plan, and I love that sentence. Like, it recognizes the health of ecosystems, animals, and humans as interconnected. So obviously, making a lot of sense with the COVID-19 and other zoonotic disease that very likely will emerge and happen within our lifetimes. And so again, it's like trying to encourage policymakers and hopefully, like other kind of legislators and yeah, to understand this interconnectedness and act towards it. Now, one of the big issue that happened is it took a lot of time, this closing plenary, so much so that they lacked quorum. So at I can't actually remember. I was watching some of it online, but I think it ended at like 4 or 5 a.m. or something like this. And by that time, a lot of people had to take their flights and couldn't be in the room anymore. So if you don't have a certain number of delegates and a certain majority, then you can't take decisions anymore. And unfortunately, the decisions that were pending had to deal with resource mobilization, which basically means money. And yes, a few pledges were made, like I can't remember, but like maybe Germany or something said, 20 million. And then you're like, yeah, we kind of just like we need 200 billion. Like we said we would do 200 billion annually. Like it's nice, but ooh, it's not gonna get us there. So all of that is still pending. And then also like monitoring and mainstreaming, so really like strategies to really redirect the money in the place where it's needed. And so what happened is that the COP16 was suspended and it will now resume at the end of February in Rome. So a lot of the delegates that were part, so we are going to have a constituency with the Women's Caucus. Some of our members are going to go there and try to support with the process and advocate for human rights and gender justice that remains, and especially in those cases for these communities to receive some of the money. Yeah, and then I wanted to end this part by sharing some of the amazing hosts that welcome me in continental Colombia. So on the top right, on the top left, sorry, the grandma is Jorge's mom, very sweet little granny. On the right is Briseida, who is the Bogotan woman that I mentioned at the beginning. That was on the hike that we went to. The bottom right is someone, Balti in Cali, who hosted me when I couldn't handle my roommates in the hotel anymore. And then on the right is someone from my fellowship. So that was very nice to meet her in person, Paloma. Yes, I'm gonna stop talking now for a bit, for like 10 to 10 minutes or something, and invite you to do a little bit of a break. Maybe you want to grab some water or a cup of tea or something. Also, obviously, if you want to ask anything, you're super welcome. Or come back or anything, or share anything that you maybe heard about through the COP that I didn't mention. And then after the break, share some recordings. Hopefully, I need to test that, but hopefully you can hear them. And the Caribbean part of the journey. Sweet. All right. Are you all strapped in for the chapter 2? Wonderful. So after the COP, I made my way to the Caribbean. You might have seen a little star pop up now. So there are these 2 very small islands off the coast of Nicaragua, which also belong to Colombia, San Andres and Providencia. And I went there partly because it was still part of Colombia and also because they have the 2nd or 3rd largest coral reef in the world. And so I went there with that goal in mind, to record the sounds of the reef. I've been doing a bit of a test sound, but I don't think it's so great. So that's not super important to hear the sound right now. But yeah, it was amazing to actually make my way there and do that and believe in my dreams. And I had no contact like, okay, bear one, and I had one person that I was following on Instagram that I was really keen to collaborate with, and anyway, that didn't end up working. But I arrived there and checked in a hostel and asked as many people as I could, try to search all possible people working on corals in the archipelago, emailed, WhatsApped, Instagrammed them, the whole lot. And so that was, and I had 2.5 weeks, so pretty limited time. But yeah, that was the first Sunday actually on the site called Nirvana Sur. And yeah, I will share some of the recordings after you. But before we do that, I wanted to share a little bit more about San Andres. So San Andres and Providencia are known as Raizal territory. So Raizal is the name. It's quite a modern name actually, but it's used by the people to describe their identity there. So they have this mix of Spanish, Colombian part of them, and then the other part, which is like Caribbean, Creole. Most of the population is Black, descendants of slaves, and then you also have whiter people, either who are also Raizal. So there are like different dynamics going on there in terms of privilege and access. And yeah, it felt pretty peaceful, but I think if I had stayed a bit longer and digged a bit more into it, I could feel like there were some interesting tensions between the racial dynamics and stuff like that. It's a fisherman culture. So a lot of the people depends on the sea and the reef to survive. And then it also has a big Christian community. So that's one thing I want to share with you. Let's see if that actually works. I'm going to close this. Closed. All right. Bear with me. At all? Okay, I'm not sure the sound situation is going to work so well, but that's just how it is with online stuff, sadly. So I'm super happy to share some of the actual recordings with you later on, and they will also go on my podcast and you know, the whole thing. But the thing I was just trying to share with you is a recording I did from inside this church, which is the first Baptist church that was built in the archipelago 120 years ago. And lots of singing. I've never had such a joyful service before. It was great. I think it looked like everybody knew the songs by heart, but they had this like karaoke screen where people could like follow along. And I was invited by one of the women in the community, so that was very sweet. Obviously, also had a lovely time. I was trying to enjoy myself on the beach. I'm not really a beach person. I'm not really an ocean person. So I went beyond my fear and took a class in scuba diving, which was so amazing. I got to see a little seahorse like super close from my face. It was so exciting, and some beautiful, colorful fish, and just the whole world under there, which was so fabulous. And yeah, try to enjoy myself in the heat and the sweatiness and like all of these kind of things. But yeah, I really want to highlight these amazing team of biologists that I got to work with, who basically helped me like find the sites to record the reefs. They took me on their boats. We had designed this like neat little system, which is it on the next one? That was like, yeah. So the picture on the right, we had this system where we would put my hydrophone, which is a quite sensitive microphone, in a PVC tube, and then put some cable ties around it and then a weight so that it would actually stay on the reef instead of just float around everywhere and get all of the sounds of the microphone. And on the land, although that looks really sketchy, because my recorder doesn't go in the water, so if that falls, it's pretty much fucked. But that day was like, so that was the part of this same slide that I showed at the beginning, the first day. And it's because of the rock being ancient coral reef, it's like really solid and really grippy. So I actually got to like leave my recorder, jump in the water and have a look at like my little microphone next to the fish and all the things. And you can hear in some of the recordings that I'd like to share with you. Maybe I'll try to just put the sound file at the end of this. You can hear the sound in the reef. You have a lot of like little clicking noise. And so that's the sound of the snapping shrimps. And then every now and then you have other more random noise, which are fish noise. So like little kind of crunching or clicks or bubbles kind of sound. And you can tell the health of a reef by the amount of snapping shrimps. They're like quite small little things because the more shrimps, the more food for the fish, the more etc. You know how it goes, right? And so the louder the sound of the snapping shrimps, the healthier the reef. And so that was great to obviously what is not shown on the picture is that I have a 20-meter long cable, which is quite limited, but that worked just about. So I was quite close to like a big corolla on that situation. In here, I'll play the little video for you, but you can see I'm like nudging the cable in between my leg because the boat was like pulling on it so hard, and obviously I couldn't see where they had put my microphone, and they were all in the water, so I couldn't communicate with them. The biologists were kind of working, right? And so that site, Pyramid, was quite tricky because you had a lot of boats, like small diesel boats all around, so it creates this like whole layer of masking noise pollution. So actually a lot of the recordings that I've taken that day, I mean, you can still hear a little bit of clicks at the back, but it's not really clean. And so what I asked them to do at the end was to put the microphone right next to where they were working, and they were cleaning coral on these like flat-ish kind of tables with a little toothbrush, like cleaning the algae that's building up on the corals. I have a little piece that I wrote here.
Lou, is that algae, is that from warming temperatures? Is that why they're cleaning it off?
Yes. Warming temperatures and different kinds of pollution, contaminants also helps. Which San Andres is like, we looked it up yesterday, 78,000 people, lots more in tourist season, and they have literally, I don't think they have a wastewater treatment, right? So everything just goes into the ocean and, you know,
Sure. And all those cruise ships that go by, they just dump.
Exactly. So pretty crap. So that felt really sketchy doing these kind of recordings, and then also I was like, yeah, anyway, it was a beautiful learning, but quite tricky. And the story time I want to share with you because that was such a highlight of my trip. So that place is called Cayo Bolivar, or East Side Key. And that island used to be open to tourism until 2018, and it then closed and is now only accessible to local fishermen and militaries. But I ended up going to that place because on the beginning of my second week in San Andres, at the hostel, somebody came along, a friend of someone who was staying there, and he mentioned to me that there was these fishermen who were going on trips teaching kids, second picture, how to fish. So they have these, it's a bit brutal really, but they run the diesel boat for like hours, and then they just have this line that they pull on. And I think during that afternoon, we were driving around for 3 hours and caught 2 fish. For me, the level of like diesel fumes and sound pollution that's going in there for the actual, I don't know, it just made absolute no sense. So there we are. But at the end of that afternoon, I was chatting with the captain, who actually spoke quite good English because a lot of people there only speak Creole. Some don't even speak a lot of Spanish, and Creole is still quite different to understand. And so I asked him about, my project and the sites where we could go and record the reef, and I needed someone with a boat to take me there, etc. And he said, well, I don't know if I can help you with that, but in 2 days we're going to Cayo Bolivar with my friends, the other fishermen that you can see on the picture on the right, another one who is not on the picture, who is the owner of the boat, and their grandson. And so I said, yes, let's go. Why not? That sounds like a great adventure. He said it will be an overnight trip. We will be sleeping on the boat, and then, you can explore the island on the next day. And I had no idea what to expect. I went there with a very small bag, and thankfully I had like a little sheet with me and things like this. But so this is the video from inside the boat. I was staying on the bed, on the right bed. The left one was the granddad and the grandson. This is the toilet. This is the kitchen. So they've bought some really like herbs to make tea and rice, and obviously went fishing. And so that was the little kitchen counter and the cockpit to drive. And then you can see the deck on the other side there. So fairly small boat with like basically 3 Black Caribbean men, and then their grandson who was like 6 years old or something like that. And so it was the full moon when we went, which was absolutely magnificent. Really beautiful, just clear waters everywhere. And I also happened to be on my bleed that night. So there was like a really a funny moment when they went fishing and dinner, and we had dinner and everything, and that was great. We drank some tea, etc. And fishermen do go to sleep quite early because they wake up quite early. And so it was quite busy in the boat. And as you can see on the picture, I'll just play the video again, but there's not much space for privacy going on there. So it was the fisherman and the grandson opposite me. There was another fisherman that had put its mattress in that little space that you see now between the kitchen and the driving wheel. And then there was another fisherman sleeping on the deck, which is this blue sheet that you see on the picture with the little boy sleeping on. And so at 11 p.m., I needed to empty my cup, and knew it was kind of getting to critical time. And so I went across the steps, tiptoed along the side of one fisherman. The other fisherman, which is the captain, on the guy with the red shirt on the left doing his thumbs up, Pedro Livingston, was like snoring big time. So I was like, okay, cool, all right. I just looked around the boat, and I was like, okay, I could like walk around the edge of the boat and then maybe go to the front and like empty my cup there, or no, this sounds sketchy as fuck. I'm gonna fall in the water. No, let's not do that. And so I ended up just like crouching on the little side that you can see there, and just like emptying it and just kind of getting back into bed. And it just felt like this absolute ultra special ritual moment of like under the full moon with this crystal clear waters in this just a complete unreal situation. So yeah, that is really going to stay with me as like one of the really special moments of that trip. And that's the key. Really amazing, clear, sandy beach. That wasn't even a sunny day, but usually the colors are really turquoise. A lot of trash everywhere, all the way to the end. A lot of plastic, glass, electronics, obviously things brought by the waters, things left by the fishermen and the people, the men on the island. So I was just out there. I always traveled with a plastic bag. I wish I had 2 that day, because I went all the way out and just polystyrene, like just really, yeah, so heartbreaking. And then because we like they took us from the boat because the big boat couldn't debark on the island. So in a little dinghy, they took us to the island. And on the island that day, there was a fisherwoman who made us this amazing breakfast, fried bread and fish that was caught literally like an hour before landing in my plate, and a little bit of coconut. So yeah, that was really nice to have breakfast there and then breakfast back on the boat. And the guys took really good care of me, and like that was the picture when we got back to San Andres. And the guy with the blue shirt on the left-hand side is still sending me voice messages and checking out on me and being like, hello Luisa, because that's the name I use kind of in Latin America. how are you here, Olgus and Andres? I'm not so good with the Creole accent, but you get the vibe. And so I think it was both very special for them to have me around as like white girl, just like getting with it. Like, I don't know, kind of rough and ready. And because I'm sure they don't get a lot of people that they invite on their boat in their adventures. And obviously, what a treat and a privilege for me to have one of the most authentic experience I've ever had with fishermen in my life. So really great. That was the little story time. The other thing that completely took my heart away in the archipelago were mangroves. I have some recording of the mangroves that I was hoping to share with you, but that will have to happen by WeTransfer or something like that. Mangroves are an incredible, important ecosystems. They are completely connected to the reef. What I learned is that the fish actually come to the mangroves to give birth, and then the little babies go back out to the reef, and then this like the whole cycle of reproduction and care happens between the reefs and the mangroves and the reefs. Obviously, super important for birds, amphibians, little crabs, which you can see on that video. And so there is two national parks. That one was on San Andres, and I was just like taken away by the beauty of the like this kind of like muddy green black just land. It was just incredible. Yeah, not on the picture are mosquitoes and little midges and that kind of stuff. Really nicely annoying. And so yeah, I just took my recorder out there and I was gonna play that little video, but that was like my little setup, just kind of dropping my mic and listening into the mangroves and trying not to get too much sunburned, and yeah, like realizing how like nature can speak in ways that we don't get to hear with our human ears sometimes, and having the opportunity to listen from underwater. And the tricky part in that area was that you need the hydrophone to be 2 meters above the surface, otherwise you pick up on ambient sound. And San Andres is very busy with cars and traffic and stuff like this, so dogs barking is probably one of the biggest quote unquote noise pollution that I got there. But yeah, it was just really, really sweet to have that afternoon by myself in the mangroves and enjoying the green and everything. And yeah, that's the other island in the archipelago called Providencia, Old Providence, pirate island, really. And the quite incredible part of that is that I arrived on the 16th of November 2024, which happened to be the exact 4-year anniversary since Hurricane Iota, which happened in the 16th of November 2020 and wiped 98% of the island infrastructure. So literally everything gone, everything. And they only had 4 deaths. So people really held up against the storm. That's the side quite close to the airport. So you can see on the picture a little bit further down is like the kind of gray brownish areas where mangroves were just completely wiped. And the reason why people say and think that most of them survived is because the mangroves really created a barrier against the hurricane, both in terms of like reducing the strength of the waves and also the kind of recall of the waves and against the winds. So it was really, really powerful for me to land somewhere in this kind of like portal time situation where the themes that I work with are resistance and resilience in times of collapse and crisis. And there I was in a place that had literally like had to learn in the last 4 years on, you know, how to learn to be resilient as a community. What are the kind of skills and knowledge that we need to share, that we need to like revive from our ancestors that have previously survived hurricanes and storms, that we need to implement so that the future generations can be better equipped. People got really involved with replanting mangroves, restoring the reef, replanting their dry forests. And what came across for me was like how much they love their land and they love their environment, and this deep sense of connection that they had with their place and how it kind of saved their lives. So there was like another incentive for them to really take care of it and out of like an extra necessity, layer of necessity. And yeah, I had the best time. It was just, it compared to San Andres, which was really touristic, like a lot of Colombian tourists, a lot of drunk people on the beach, Brazilian, Argentinian tourists, that kind of stuff. There, it was mostly just kids playing and locals just having like listening to reggae, and there was something just very natural and authentic about it, which obviously love very much. Incredible sights, like just the most beautiful skies and waters. And I think there was something also about the energy of a hurricane that literally wiped everything. So there was such like freshness, and maybe if I had arrived 1 year later, I would have seen a lot of trash and a lot of like stuff like that built up. But there was like a vibrancy and aliveness in the land and in the people that really stayed with me. I met this lovely man on the left-hand side, Casimiro Newbold, who is known as the Coral Man. And he's actually the person that brought my attention to this archipelago. So there is someone that I've been following on Instagram called Ana Maria Jesse, who is a filmmaker and a historian who's making a movie about this guy. And he is a fisherman and loves coral. So I have a really beautiful interview with him. That was on maybe my second or third day there. And at the end of the interview, which happened at noon, he offered me a shot of first a beer and then a shot of aguardiente, which I presented at the beginning is this a strong liquor, which I obviously said yes to because, I mean, why not? It's noon after all. And then he took me on this like just funniest day, like driving me around on his bike. He was like, okay, I'm gonna bring you to a friend. We're gonna have some chicharron. I was like fried pork skin. I was like, yeah, no, thanks so much. I don't really eat meat. It's like, don't worry, I have fresh lobster. I cook you fresh lobster, baby. It's so good, baby. Come with me, baby. It was just like, it felt like a Caribbean uncle that was just really taking me under his wing. So we went to his friends and harvested some lime. I love lime so much. Lemons and limes are like some of my favorite things. They have these like really cool blue and green and turquoise lizards on the island. So this is like the picture on the right that you can see there. Yeah, so just had like the best time. It was very fun. And then the Rasta man that you can see on the right hand side is someone that I met on my very first day there. And it's a very sweet story because I arrived very early in the morning and rested for most of the day, and then thought, okay, I'm gonna get some avocado for breakfast or something like that. And just wanted to walk to town. I was staying in Old Town, so maybe 20 minutes. There's like one road around the island, basically. So it's pretty easy. And walked around, and then so he was just nearby cleaning his bike or whatever. So, hi, hello, yeah, you good? Yeah, man, yeah, all good, man, yeah. Happy, kept on walking, and so the solar panel. I was like, oh my god, they have solar panels here. Oh, cool. Found out later that a lot of solar panels were installed after the hurricane. Problem is, they are only used when the generator is off. So I'm not so sure. I was trying to dig a bit more into the story there. There's something about like the family that owns the generator that maybe doesn't want quite to let go of the power, or the pun intended power, or whatever double meaning there. But anyway, so I was taking a picture of that, and he just drives by with his bike, offers me a ride. It's like, oh, where are you going? I'm going to town to shop. How do you want to come? And I had been told by, including Colombian people on the mainland, that people in the archipelago always try to rip you off, always want some money from you, etc. So I just checked with him, are you charging? No, it's okay. Are you sure? No. Okay, great. So I jumped on the back of his bike and off we went. And then on the way, it's like 10-minute, whatever, 5-10 minute drive. So many people were greeting him, like elder ladies and young people and just all sorts. I was like, wow, who is that guy? Like, he seemed just like really well liked by the community. And so we went to one shop together. They didn't have avocado. He took me on the other side of the street. There's 2 shops basically. Well, there is quite a few more of them, but the main big supermarkets. Anyway, and then I found my avocados. I looked at the fridge just before paying, and I saw there was a beer. It was like Saturday, 6 p.m., literally first day in Providencia. So I looked at him, I looked at the fridge, I was like, you want a beer, man? Yeah, cool, great, let's do it. And so we drove back, and he brought me to this like lovely little secret beach kind of thing. And then we chilled there, and we ended up hanging out every day. And he took me to another amazing, beautiful beach on the south of the island, and that's his nephew on the bottom picture. So I shared my little painting kit with him. He had never painted before. He did the first one, and then he was like, "Can I do another one?" So I gave him another paper, and he was very proud to bring it to his parents in the evening. And yeah, I don't know. I feel like I just made some really beautiful, strong friendships with like Black Caribbean men, which is like on the spectrum of how different we can be. It's like quite out there. And there was no I don't know, no like weird or awkward or sexual whatever energy. It was just really nice. And I could, I would have not explored the island in the same way if it wouldn't have been without Casimiro and Yedis. So super grateful to meet them, and yeah, hopefully we'll be back. It would be great. And then the other person that I spent some time with on the island was from the Life of Pachamama delegation, which is the youth Colombian group I mentioned that I was with at COP. Amazing marine biologists, local women from San Andres originally, who moved to Providencia. And so she has a boat. So we went on her boat and did some recordings in the national park, which you're not really allowed to do without like some kind of forms and stuff like this, but I just did it. And so the picture in the middle is where the microphone was, which I can't actually see where it is, but it's somewhere there. So amazing to see all those fish and get a little picture from under the surface where my microphone was. And interestingly enough, my last day on Providencia happened to be when organization was hosting a workshop on blue carbon. So this was a community session, information session around what is blue carbon, how can it support or bring some income to the community, do they even want it in the first place, that kind of stuff. And they had put these maps at the end of the session where people were writing down the areas where they had most mangroves being affected, or the reef from the hurricane, like which parts still need to do some recovery. And so that session was sponsored by Avianca, for example, which as part of their compensation scheme is hoping to finance communities in the Caribbean to not, for example, not plant like trees, which would be green kind of carbon, but restore mangroves and reef, blue carbon, to compensate in their business schemes. So super great. Like there was this guy with the yellow shirt was like really vocal, and just a lot of people were like fishermen or like farmers, people of the land kind of thing. And the two guys were presenting from mainland Colombia, something in Spanish or something, and he was like, and then there was another woman who was like kind of well versed in both world, both the community and kind of mainland NGO world, and she spoke Creole. So she checked with the people at the beginning. She's like, "Oh, is this okay for you if this happens in Spanish?" And then this guy and other people were like, "Yeah, we don't speak no Spanish. We want Creole here. Like we're all talk." Just being really like, we don't take none of that shit. Like talk to us in our language, right? So she was translating what they were presenting, all of the kind of technical information and la la la. But it was great to see, to see elders and different generations really getting involved in the process. And so these are all of the people, most of the people I interviewed in the archipelago. The other bit I would have loved to share with you, which I'm still going to try because his voice is quite loud. Whoops. Let me step back. Is Camilo, the man wearing the flower. Let me try that. And we are going to 4 minutes.
And I stay with shock. I say, oh, that's it. Well, really, for me, that one of the more beautiful thing as a fisherman, because not every fisherman would accept if you go and plant a coral, because they don't understand. But for me, one of the world best thing I ever do in my life I love fishing, but for me, fix the coral and restore it is the best for me. I never live an experience so sweet in my life. And I have a lot of time fishing, and coral are the best. That is a nice, nice thing to work with. Okay.
Can you share a little bit more? Like why does it bring you so much joy, or why do you find it so amazing to work with them? Because it's also quite hard work, no? It's like, of course, fishing is also super hard, but you have to go down there and clean, and so, and you have to be very patient, I think. So why do you enjoy it so much? Like, what do you find so powerful with it?
Well, first of all, the love what you have for the sea. I have a lot of love because I born right and I grew right in the Bay of Cove. I born right in I say born in the sea. Either one of the person them way I can't tell you when I learn to swim, but I know say when I know myself, as I recognize myself swimming, diving, fishing in. When I know myself, I don't know. Maybe I can't tell you when I start go school, but I can tell you say I know for more or less when I start go see. So I have that love, and I have the patience. That's my patience. What I have is so powerful and so strong. Till my family, they always ask me, I wish I should have the patience where you got. Because anything I do, I just take my time and I sit and relax and do it with love. Because if I know I do it with love, I prefer not do it.
Gorgeous. Hold on. There we go. So yeah, I guess that's like the thing that really came out across for me is like how the love, just the love that people have, and maybe I can share, because I don't have a lot more slides left to this, but maybe I can share a little bit from Casimiro as well. One thing that I learned, which is quite intense, is like, because I was somehow as an anthropologist, whatever, romanticizing and I can't find the word right now, but like giving exoticism to foreign cultures. I was thinking, oh, maybe they have some myths or stories about like how sacred coral is, la la la. What these two guys told me is that before their work with Blue Indigo and other of the marine biology foundations and different NGOs, they considered, bye, thank you so much. They considered corals as rock. So it was just like lifeless things. They were just like cutting shells and things out of it, like treating it as like debris. And only afterwards, with the collaboration and understanding how life grows, and you have this collaboration of the polyps who come and kind of like have this symbiotic relationship with the calcium formation, that they realize how much life there is around it and how much they want to care for it, etc. So yeah, it was really sweet to have this this understanding with them, and the humbleness, I guess, of like not assuming that they knew everything before, but that how it shifted their practice as fishermen. Because the other thing that happens a lot is boats dropping their anchors, either when they get tourists to dive somewhere or scientists to go somewhere, like all of these things. So every time you drop your anchors on corals, obviously it completely hammers it. Yeah, and then I got to speak with two female marine biologists who are on the right picture, and with Shaylee, who's like in the middle picture, who shared with me in Providencia about all of the kind of restoration efforts that they did after the hurricane, all of the different community involvement processes. She shared a very personal testimony of her story and surviving that night of the hurricane. So yes, more to come on my platforms very soon. On my last day in the Archipelago, I was invited by Ruben, who is I have quite a big smile on the bottom row with the other guy in the truck. That's this man, a marine biologist as well. And he invited me that morning to go and come along with their team to see them transplanting coral. Great. I had been to that site in my very first weekend, so I felt really keen. And it was a beautiful sunny day, and I said, great, let's go. And he said, well, what you could do while we are transplanting the coral is you can go and take pictures of us. That would be really helpful. if you don't know yet, I'm really not comfortable in open waters, and that's a euphemism. I'm actually usually quite shit scared. And they obviously all had gas bottles because they need to work. And I only had my little scuba dive and no equipment or anything. So that the picture on the right was the two women that was on that day and that morning. And what they are doing is filling little pockets of concrete so that the fragments that have grown in the nursery can then be transplanted onto the ocean floor with a little bit of concrete, and then they stick the coral to the ocean floor every 10 centimeters or so in like a little perimeter, and that recreates the reef bottom up. And so I was like, great, let's go. That will give me some purpose. Sounds fun, taking pictures. And so that was at the beginning of the day, and that was a few hours later. So basically what happened is that after 1.5 hours, felt like quite a long time, just like floating about and taking pictures. And, I started to get quite tired, and then I started popping my head back at the surface, and I could see this like really gray sky and kind of stormy weather. And I was just like, it doesn't look so great. So I tried to make a sign and to Ruben, the team leader, and he was like, yeah, we're trying to finish. And I could see they only had like a few rows, and so it's like, fine, it's cool. And then put my head back up, and the waves were getting like choppier and choppier, and it's getting more and more water in my tuba. I was like, made another sign. I was like, dude, I'm starting to panic. Like, I had mentioned to him my anxiety with water, so he knew about it, and he was like, well, I can't take you back right now because you have this like stairway basically on the side across like one of these, can't really see it, but like at the back of me there is this little stairway hidden in between the rocks. So once I didn't really know where it was. Anyway, at some point I had enough. I could feel like I was just like, that's it, I need to leave now. You guys do your thing, I need to go. I'm literally freaking out. And there was this really strong contrast between, as soon as I put my head in the water, there was this like peaceful little fish and just nice little moving vibes, and then I put my head above, and it was just like choppy waters and like wind and just craziness. So I was just trying to just make it happen. And I at some point I just couldn't take it anymore. And I remember there was this little alcove where I had first dived, kind of jumped from to when I was doing my recording. And so it was like, obviously like quite a lot of movement with the waves. So I just got a little bit closer and closer, and then found my little kind of rock target. And I just remember like almost like jumping and like clamping myself like a little shell or a little bigorneau or something, and like took my breath back again, and like my knees were bleeding a bit, but it was very minimal, and managed to like get back on land, and then the team made their way back, etc. But that day there was actually a diving instructors, and they had some people under the surface like quite deep, and one of the people that was diving with them, a young woman, they took like 1.5 2 hours to get her out of the water because it was so choppy, and she had no energy anymore. So they had a rope, and they had like to take the equipment off her, and then one person went in, and then two people went in, and it was just like a whole chaos. So I felt quite like, part of me was quite proud about like getting my skin out of this and being like, oh, fuck this shit, I'm out. But yeah, that and then I flew out that evening. So that was like a really packed, mad thing to end my time in the islands with. The last week I spent in Colombia was to a friend's place, back to Cali. I flew and stayed in her amazing garden, which had been taken care of by, I don't know, other gardeners, and like there was an orchid farm before, and it was just incredible. I've posted some other pictures on my social media that you can see as well. But it felt like a little retreat, had some actually space to myself, some quiet. She was vegan, so we had some really nice food, and she had some really sweet time. And I want to end with this, which is on the last day of my visit there. She had a friend come over to share a lambe lambe workshop, which is a form of theater where you create scenes from a little box. And so we spent the afternoon crafting and coming up with stories, and yeah, creating a little story. So I wanted to end my presentation with this little story. Hope you can hear the sound effects are homemade. Thanks, everyone.